Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing. One of the unfortunate parts of this role is announcing former Rotarians who are no longer with us. So today I would like to remember Rotarian Detlef Moore, who passed away this weekend in peace. Detlef was an active member of Rotary for more than 25 years and loved this Rotary Club very deeply. In addition to Rotary, Detlef was also a longtime member and leader in the Kentucky Colonels Association, attaining the rank of general, which is a rather extraordinary feat. He will be remembered as a wonderful Rotarian, leader, and husband. So let's please take a moment of silence for Detlef and his family. Thank you. Our thoughts go out to Detlef and our prayers to him and his family. Now, Dan Buttery will come and give our invocation.
Appropriate for our guest today. Did they get off? Those words may not be recognized to anyone, but to each and every Coast Guard member, they represent a true hero, Signalman First Class Douglas Monroe. Ask any Coast Guardman or Marine about Douglas Monroe, and they might tell you about September 27th, 1942, when Monroe gave his life in support of withdrawal of the 7th Marines at Guadalcanal. The Marines were being driven back to the beach, and many did not have radios to request assistance. A single help spelled out using T-shirts on the ridge near the beach sent a loud and clear signal to those looking on. Back at the staging area, Monroe volunteered to navigate his landing craft to rescue the Marines from enemy fire. Nearing the beach and braving incoming fire, Monroe directed the landing craft to screen and help push forward. Even with Japanese forces gaining ground and nearing the beach, Monroe is an inspiration for so many who serve in the Coast Guard for his sacrifice. Douglas Monroe posthumously received the Medal of Honor, an award in which he was nominated by then Marine Lieutenant Colonel Lewis B. Chesty Puller, one of the Marines he saved that day. 79 years ago yesterday, did they get off? Were Douglas Monroe's last words before succumbing to his wounds. Semper Paratus.
Thank you, Dan. You guys can all be seated. I'd like to give another thank you to our sponsors whose logos appeared on the screens before the presentation. If you have an interest in either highlighting your company with a brief video or their logo on the rotating screen before the presentation, please contact Mary in the Rotary office. I'd like to welcome our guests. Fairly short list today. Jody Lowe from the Lowe Group, can you please raise your hand so you can be recognized? Perfect. Thank you. We're happy to have you here at Rotary. As some of you know, last week after the meeting, a group of Rotarians got together, a group of Rotarians interested in finding meaningful ways to provide support to the Afghan refugees at Fort McCoy. I'd like to call up Rotarian Janan Najib to give us an update on the group and the efforts they have put together so far.
Thank you very much. Last week, a group of us, 12 Rotarians, met together to discuss how we could possibly help the Afghan refugees at Fort McCoy because we became aware early on that many, in fact, if not all, left with basically the clothes on their back because after the bombing at Kabul airport, they were required to just leave everything and just basically get on. So the group included myself as president of the Milwaukee Muslim Women's Coalition, and Colonel Chris Kalenda was with us, as well as many other Rotarians. Last weekend, I had the opportunity to go and visit Fort McCoy with Congresswoman Gwen Moore and Congresswoman Ilhan Omar from neighboring Minnesota, especially because she herself had been a refugee, and it was really just to show the possibilities and to uplift the refugees that were there. We took with us our third truckload of items, all brand new items for the refugees. And we have amongst the Rotarians here people that are connected with American Red Cross, Lutheran Social Services. Many of you know that Rubicon is also working out there. And so from last week to this week, we have already collected, you guys are just a generous bunch, $12,675 to be used for the refugees. So the board is going to meet today to decide and get a recommendation as to how to best use these donations. We do know that winter is around the corner. During the time that I was there, we saw that the majority are still in sandals. They had, sheets and blankets that they were covering themselves with because it was chilly then. And so right now, the most urgent thing are shoes and winter clothing. But we will let you know what comes out of the meeting and how the vote is, the recommendation to spend the money. And we welcome all of your input. But thank you all for your generosity.
Really an incredible feat. Rotarians, we talk about ourselves being, people of action, and in less than a week to raise $12,000 to support the refugees and, be supportive of, Rotarians have actually purchased, delivered goods, and actually already been to Fort McCoy to help with the delivery of those goods. Really something that everybody in this room should be really proud about, that, we as this club were able to support and to react that quickly. So thank you for everybody for everything they've done. Now, Barbara Velez has a quick announcement.
As part of that committee, I can tell you it makes me proud to be a Rotarian, and thank you, Dr. Bob, for your leadership on that committee. On a lighter note, it is the beginning of October is coming, and so is the holiday season. And I know all of you look forward to our holiday program, and I can tell you that this year we will be reviving the Reveling Rotarians. So any of you who wish to be part of that group to join Tony Franda and Beth Federley Heller, who has already signed up, please let me know, because the more the voices, the more the merrier. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Another quick reminder, Rotary is hosting a book read this fall, The Sum of Us, What Racism Costs Everybody and How We Can Prosper Together. Group discussion will be held September 30th from 4 till 5:30. We'll also have follow-up discussions on October 14th and the 28th. Those will occur over Zoom. So thanks to Paula Pennebaker for leading those discussions. Information will be sent for those who have signed up, and if you are interested, please reach out to the Rotary office and let them know. Now, Kathy Eilers has an update for us regarding the Thai Rotarian Tour.
Thank you, President Todd. I'm a stand-in for Jerry Stepaniak, who's out of town, but I want to issue a special invitation to have you join us on Thursday morning at the new Granite Hills Hospital. This is a very unique happening in this community. This hospital is a brand new psychiatric facility that will allow Milwaukee County to close its inpatient beds. So this is an opportunity to see what a state-of-the-art mental health facility looks like. People who have seen this are really impressed with how different it is from old-time psychiatric hospitals. So if you can join us, there's flyers on the table. It's Thursday morning at 7:45, and we would love to have you come along. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. And now Phil Volrath, retired senior public relations and communications professional, will introduce our speaker.
Thank you, President Todd. My purpose is to introduce our speaker today. He is Captain Don Montoro, commander of Coast Guard Sector Lake Michigan. He has also served as the co-chair of Armed Forces Week this year, which officially occurred in May, but because of COVID has been spread out in various segments throughout the year. He has assumed his current position in 2020. He leads 23 Coast Guard units with a force of 500 active duty, 200 reserve, and 1,000 auxiliary personnel. He leads efforts to Lake Michigan in the key areas of search and rescue, law enforcement, aids to navigation, marine safety, and homeland security for the states of Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin. Prior to coming to Milwaukee, Captain Montoro was the Deputy Sector Commander San Diego, where he was responsible for all U.S. Coast Guard missions in San Diego and surrounding counties out to 200 nautical miles offshore. Captain Montoro is the third generation in his family to serve in the U.S. Coast Guard. He is married and has 3 children. And I would just want to say one quick thing. If any of you do have boats or vessels that you have and operate here on Lake Michigan, it might be advisory to get a business card from Captain Montoro before he leaves today, just in case you're inspected for lifesavers or anything like that. You could mention that you know it. Please join me in welcoming Captain Don Montoro to Rotary.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Phil. Thank you all for allowing me to come and share a little bit about the Coast Guard with you. I know there were a couple opportunities that slipped through our hands over the last few months, but I'm glad to finally make it here. Aaron, I'll ask you to roll tape. I've always wanted to say that. So.
To the extraordinary men and women of our total workforce, your leadership team stands ready to tirelessly be your advocate. My challenge to you is simple. Are you ready?
Mayday, we're going down! Mayday, this is a pitch up storm, we're going down! They're reporting to be off Hat Island. This is Coast Guard Sector Puget Sound. Sir, how many persons on board do you have your vessel? Over.
The Coast Guard says it has rescued 133 people in just the last 72 hours.
Members of the Coast Guard scooped the dogs up just in time, saving them from Florence's rising floodwaters.
Evacuated a mother with her twins, was evacuated by the Coast Guard.
Rescue crews with the Coast Guard expect another busy day today.
The head of the U.S. Coast Guard, Commandant Carl Schultz.
Coast Guard, we have a serious collision out here. Any vessel in the vicinity of Key Biscayne, this is Coast Guard Sector Miami.
I'm abandoning ship. Mayday, mayday, mayday. I'm on fire. I'm out of control. I'm abandoning ship. Mayday, mayday, mayday.
I call them angels who came from the sky to save us.
Having the Coast Guard around is like, being such a presence in our community is like, it's like having a backbone. Like you always know that you have a Coast Guard that you can ultimately rely on.
One of our biggest goals as the Coast Guard is we're trying to remain ready, be responsive, and stay relevant.
All right, who's ready to join? Well, I can say when I was the sector response chief in San Francisco, I think we saved over 300 lives one year. We never got as much press coverage as we did when we saved a dog that was swimming out in the middle of the bay. You took a couple pictures of that, sent it to the media, it's golden. Yeah, people love their animals. Well, good afternoon. I just wanted to start off by saying that I started my Coast Guard journey nearly 30 years ago. I was 18 years old. I just graduated high school a few weeks before shipping off to boot camp in Cape May, New Jersey. Up to that point in my life, I had never spent more than a day away from my family. We were incredibly close, and frankly, I was terrified. Now at the time, my father was the captain of the Port of San Diego. He held the rank of captain as I do now, and I remember him driving me to the hotel that night before I shipped out. As I got out of the car, I said to him, "I'm not sure I can do this." My dad calmly shared his own experience. He said, "I'm going to tell you the same thing my dad told me the day he dropped me off for the bus to the academy." He said, "You can do this. Now get out of the car, I'm double parked." Yeah. So like the countless millions of men and women that came before me in times of war, in times building up to war, and in times of peace, I put one foot in front of the other and entered into a fraternity of citizens dedicated to the service of our nation. Now I've commanded a cutter across a breaking Oregon River bar during a raging winter storm, like the one there. That's actually Coos Bay, Oregon, where I was stationed. I stood the watch alone on a bridge of a cutter in the middle of a violent hurricane in the dead of night for more than 8 hours, without a helmsman or a quartermaster or a watch relief, because everyone else was too seasick to function. I've jumped aboard vessels trying to avoid capture because they were smuggling either drugs or migrants into our country, not knowing if the smugglers were armed or violent or both. I even routinely boarded shrimp boats in the Gulf of Mexico to ensure compliance with fishing regulations, as the crew swept their bycatch, or the non-shrimp product they were discarding, into the sea to rapacious mouths of swarming sharks in a bloody feeding frenzy. There's nothing like crossing from your boat onto a shrimp boat and knowing that if you fall in the water, you're going to be chum. And that's what it looked like. I think most would agree there's some level of courage required to do each of these things. Certainly not the amount of courage it took to defend Little Round Top at Gettysburg, or to climb the ramparts at Yorktown, or scale the hill at Iwo Jima, but courage nonetheless. In my mind, however, the most courageous thing I ever did, will ever do, and granted I'm not a courageous person by nature, was taking that first step into the hallowed halls of the enlisted recruit barracks, honoring Douglas Monroe, the Coast Guard's only Medal of Honor recipient. There's the picture there. To serve something greater than oneself, to serve our country, your unit, the man or woman standing next to you, this is how truly unremarkable citizens attain greatness, by selfless service to others. After 30 years of military service, I can say without hesitation, nothing truly great or important was achieved without tremendous sacrifice. And in some cases, in order to preserve our liberties, it requires the ultimate sacrifice. Your United States Coast Guard has played a vital role in each of the nation's major armed conflicts, from the War of Independence to the most recent wars in the Middle East. We continue to serve. We continue to sacrifice to ensure the safety and security of our neighbors and our communities. So the greatest lesson I've learned over the last 3 decades was to attack the obstacle I feared the most. The obstacle that requires the most sacrifice. And by conquering that obstacle, what I gained as a reward was increased self-confidence and a pride in a job well done. I would also like to share 3 additional lessons that I learned along my Coast Guard journey. First of all, I'm quite certain nothing great was ever achieved without developing a plan. As the Chief of Response at Sector San Francisco, the Coast Guard's busiest search and rescue sector, I was the senior officer responsible for the sector's law enforcement and search and rescue mission. And I got a front row seat to countless stupid human tricks performed by our boating public. One case of distinction involved a man estranged from his ex-wife, a stolen sailboat, and the kidnapping of his 2 children, ages 2 and 4 years old, that he hadn't seen for some time. His plan was to first sail to Central America on the stolen sailboat, and then eventually make his way to Australia. There were a few problems with his plan. First, he was not a sailor. He ended up sailing in giant circles off the coast of San Francisco without realizing it. Second, he had clearly never spent much time with small children. They started to become extremely irritable about the time they reached the Golden Gate Bridge. And third, utilizing a sailboat to escape law enforcement is kind of like using a tractor as your getaway car after robbing a bank. This is the individual and his 2 children. Upon receiving the stolen vessel report, we launched the C-130, and not long after, we located the sailboat off of Monterey. We set up an incident action plan with our local law enforcement partners, launched a cutter out of Monterey with an FBI negotiator as part of the boarding team, but that really wasn't necessary. The assailant had had enough when we arrived. When the boarding team arrived, the happiest person to see them was the estranged father. He welcomed the boarding team on the boat and happily complied with their direction. I think he quickly concluded that jail beat spending several months alone with 2 toddlers on a sailboat. Contrary to the sailboat thief, the Coast Guard always has a plan. In fact, I believe much of our greatness stems from the ability of our leaders to bring order to chaos by quickly and decisively developing effective plans that positively impact the lives of thousands of people placed in harm's way each year. As the deputy commander at Sector San Diego, we had the distinct pleasure of sharing the world's busiest international port of entry with Tijuana. Each year, millions of people entered the U.S. through the land ports of San Isidro and Otay Mesa. Those that are unsuccessful crossing by land will often attempt to enter the country by sea. It is not uncommon for more than 1,000 people to be captured attempting to cross the land border near San Diego illegally in a single night by CBP. By contrast, the Coast Guard and the NCBP intercept approximately 1,000 people crossing by boat each year. However, that number is rising dramatically. Smuggling illegal aliens is a big business for the cartels. An individual from a Latin American country can pay up to $10,000 for a passage, while an individual from China can pay up to $50,000 for that same passage. A third party often pays the cost. This is human trafficking at its worst. These individuals will often face horrible conditions as indentured servants in a myriad of illicit activities. We all watched as political and economic instability rocked Latin America over the last several years, and bands of thousands of migrants slowly worked their way north en route to the U.S. As the caravan approached the U.S.-Mexican border, it was clear that the Coast Guard and Customs and Border Protection needed a well-coordinated incident action plan. We stood up an incident management team and got to work developing a plan to stop the illegal entries, to establish a process to review asylum requests while the migrants waited in Mexico, and we averted a national crisis, at least for the time being. Having a plan brought order to chaos. So, as many of you were aware, over the last few years, we have had some issues with sickness on board massive cruise ships, especially during the COVID period. We had 4 fairly high-profile cases with more than 5,000 people on board in the months of March, April, and May of 2020 as the COVID pandemic raged. Many of these vessels came from South America. Actually, one came from Asia. If you recall, one of them stopped in Honolulu and was told that they couldn't disembark. So we were left with a conundrum: how to work with the CDC, how to work with the city of San Diego, and how to get these 5,000 people off these vessels in a well-organized and concerted manner. That required a plan. It required a lot of coordination. And ultimately, we got all those members off. And there were very few cases of transmission in San Diego from these vessels. Every year, hundreds of fishermen take to the ice in the dead of winter. They cut a hole in the ice and sit in what looks like to me to be this tool shed my grandma had in her backyard, hoping a fish will bite their line. They prepare for weeks and spend considerable resources to engage in activity that seems less than enjoyable. I'm from California, so far be it for me to pass judgment on the traditions of northern Midwesterners, but after doing ice rescue training on Lake Michigan in February, I'm not sure I can come up with many activities less appealing to me. To each their own. So if you recall last winter, a sheet of ice broke free of shore near Green Bay, just south of Sturgeon Bay, carrying with it more than 60 fishermen. The ice sheet was stretched for more than a mile and was traveling at a fairly decent clip out to the middle of the bay. We immediately launched Heaven and Earth in response. Wisconsin DNR, Station Sturgeon Bay, local sheriff's units, Air Station Traverse City, etc. Thinking we were going to arrive on scene to thankful and adoring crowds, exalting us as heroes. Instead, the team of lifesavers were surprised to find that many of the anglers wanted to remain on the ice floe. You see, the fishing was about to get good, they said. In fact, they asked if we could come back later. We actually had to convince them that they were in danger and they needed to be evacuated. That's a group deeply committed to their plan, at great risk to their own safety. They plan to fish no matter what. Never fall in love with your plan. So in San Diego and in San Francisco, we have a problem with derelict vessels. In San Francisco and the San Francisco Bay Delta, we had over 400 derelict vessels. Oftentimes these become pollution problems because they're used by the homeless, unfortunately. There's nowhere to pump their sewage. There's nowhere to discard their drug paraphernalia, and they become quite a mess. This is a picture, not a very good one, of the tug Respect, which was about a 150-foot ocean-going sea tug that sunk during a storm. A lot of what happens is these are sold at auction to the lowest bidder, or the highest bidder, which oftentimes is a fairly low bid. Oftentimes these folks have dreams of turning them into Airbnbs, and most often they don't make it that far. So this sunk in the Oakland estuary, in between Alameda and Oakland, if you're familiar with the area, and was a pollution risk and an eyesore, and was one of the 400 vessels. So the EPA, the state of California, and the Coast Guard got together, and we coordinated how we planned to lift this vessel because it had a lot of hazardous material on board and oil. So we used the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund and CERCLA, which deals with hazardous materials, and spent about $1.5 million raising this vessel. But it was a talk, and the reason I bring this up is we had to bring a heavy ocean crane down from Seattle. I think it cost us about $300,000 or $400,000 just to ship it down there. And the salvage company that we were working with, they were wonderful people, and we'd worked with them in the past. They assured us that with this crane we could get the ship up. So I was the lead, I was the incident commander, and I assured the captain of the port, my boss, that we could get this done. Again, we were already about $1.2 million into the hole on this project, and the crane pulled for about 7 or 8 hours, and it wasn't moving. And I saw my career dissipation light blinking as I went back to the captain of the port and had to explain to him that I just spent $1.5 million and the boat's still stuck at the bottom of the estuary. So we changed our plan. We changed the way in which we pulled on it. We brought some folks down from Washington, D.C. Who says Washington, D.C. doesn't produce anything positive? And we came up with a better salvage plan. We changed our plan, and we've successfully lifted the vessel, and it now is probably paperclip somewhere as it was broken up into pieces. Oops. The last lesson I will leave you is how critically important it is for me to find the one thing that I was passionate about and make it my life's work. Nietzsche famously said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." You see, I am the third generation of my family to serve in the Coast Guard, and that's my daughter. My daughter graduated from Coast Guard basic training in January of this year, and last week from her vocational school, what we call A School. I'm not a mathematician, but I believe that makes 4 generations of Montoros to serve in our nation's finest sea-going service. I'm incredibly proud of my family's Coast Guard legacy. Over the course of my career, I've come in contact with some of the greatest men and women this country has ever produced. As the executive officer of the Coast Guard cutter P Island, we were patrolling the coast of Florida, just east of Cape Canaveral, when we received a report from a Good Samaritan of a dive vessel sinking with people on board. We were about 15 minutes away, and when we arrived on scene, we saw 3 divers drifting alongside 2 older men who were kept afloat by a large cooler. When we got the people on board, the divers quickly told us their story of how they were surveying the bottom 40 feet underwater when one of them looked up and, much to their surprise, watched as their boat slowly sank and ended up resting gently in the sand next to where they were diving. That must have been a sight. I can only imagine what was going through their minds. But here's the more interesting part. When they reached the surface to see what had happened to the other 2 gentlemen, the older men, who we later found out were the father and the uncle, they quickly learned that the 2 older men didn't grab the life jackets. They didn't grab the electronic radio beacon, what we call EPIR, or a sound-producing device, or the flares. They didn't even make a radio distress call on their VHF channel 16. No, these 2 men grabbed what was truly important to them. They grabbed their cigarettes and the ice chest full of beer. These 2 men were willing to die for what they were passionate about. Truly an inspiration. In closing, although my passions lay elsewhere, I would like to think that I, like those 2 elderly gentlemen, am also willing to risk my life for something I hold in high regard. That passion has brought me tremendous joy in the knowledge that I serve the greatest nation ever to grace this planet. A nation predicated on the pursuit of a more perfect union. One continuing to strengthen its commitment and expand its definition of individual liberty. A few months ago, I read David McCullough's book on Truman, and after some quick calculations, realized I'd read biographies on nearly half the US presidents. So I set out to read a biography of each of the remaining presidents. Currently, I'm reading Richard Brockhauser's work on James Madison. As many of you know, James Madison was frequently referred to as the father of the Constitution, which, after reading this book, I've learned isn't entirely accurate. He was more like the shepherd of the Constitutional Convention and the ratification process. He was kind of like a cat herder. Anyway, the point I wanted to make, what became evident to me, is that we often take for granted how truly revolutionary our form of government was and continues to be. In the 5,000 years of human civilization, never had a group of people fought and earned the right to govern themselves. Even today, less than half of the nations in the world are truly democratic. Democracy is advanced government. It requires an informed, motivated, and courageous electorate. The men and women of the Coast Guard are the embodiment of the citizen service member. We will continue to be semper paratus, always ready to serve our nation. God bless you all, and God bless our great nation. Thank you. And Aaron, I think we have one more video.
I thought I was watching a movie, Towering Inferno at first. And then I looked real close, and I noticed it was the World Trade Center. I was compelled because I'm a type of person that can't stand by and watch other people suffer. And to me, they were suffering. They wanted to get off the island. And there was no way for them to get off the island other than the water. And I had noticed when I was watching the television, I saw a lot of, the ferries going up into the slips and taking people off. I said, fine, we could do the same thing. I could take people on my boat, get in there, take them where they have to go. And that's what we did.
On the morning of September 11th, when the towers came down, millions of people ran for safety. Hundreds of thousands of them ran south to the water's edge. That's when they realized that Manhattan is indeed an island, and that they were trapped.
They were feeling helpless, and that's the worst feeling in the world. What was a person on the ground going to do? Buildings were down. There were people laying under the rubble of the building. Firemen, civilians. My wife was there, and I turned around. I says, I've got to go do something. Just like that. And she looked at me. She says, what are you going to do, you maniac? I says, I'm going to take the amberjack up into the city and help. She says, but what if they're attacked again? I says, well, then that's something I have to live with. I says, I have to do what I have to do. I says, and nobody can stop me right now. Even if I save one person or I rescue one person, that's one person less that will suffer and die.
They were trying to evacuate Manhattan because nobody knew what was going on. You didn't know if something else was going to happen. It was just, a madness on one side and wanting to help people on the other side.
They were just streaming out of the buildings, and the first mode of transportation they saw was a ferry boat. That's when they knew, this is how I'm getting out of here. So they didn't even care where the boat was going.
There wasn't panic in New York in the beginning, just volume. It wasn't until the first building fell that there was panic.
You heard the building go down, but we're in the slip, so we can't see it. That's when we started letting go, and then all of a sudden, engulfed. You couldn't see anything.
People were actually jumping into the river and swimming out of Manhattan. Boats were very nearly running them over.
Wait. These people wanted out of Manhattan no matter any way they could.
Somebody wants you to go over there.
Every mode of transportation out of Manhattan was shut down. All the subways were shut. The tunnels were all closed. They closed the bridges. They closed everything immediately.
Boats, usually an afterthought in most New Yorkers' minds, were for the first time in over a century the only way in of Lower Manhattan.
The process that actually had already started. There were some boats that were grabbing people, that people were lined up at the walls.
On the left. It's just human nature. You see people in distress on the seawall in Manhattan begging you to pick them up. You have to pick them up.
They didn't know what was going on. They seen the building getting hit with these two planes. As far as they was concerned, we were being bombed. I was wondering if they were going to come on the boat, if they had people with bombs, or if they were going to come on. We're a big orange target in the middle of that harbor. My job is to keep the boat safe, my passengers safe, my crew safe.
Everybody was in shock, running around. They didn't want to leave their families. They had loved ones running around the city.
Anybody has a baby? Nobody has it.
There was one guy ran from the apron and jumped onto the boat. He grabbed onto the metal, climbed up right next to the pilot. So I'm going out there to say something. He slides down to the next deck. So the deckhands get him and go, what are you doing? He goes, I'm jumping for my life. So, you couldn't argue with him there.
There was a small boat that was at the lower tip of Manhattan. I thought the boat was going to flip over because so many people were trying to get on. And as I looked behind, they were just 10 deep. And that's kind of what gave us the idea.
We decided that this has to get better organized and we better do it, and that's what we did.
So we decided to make the call on the radio. All available boats. This is the United States Coast Guard aboard the pilot boat in New York. Anyone want to help with the evacuation of Lower Manhattan? Report to Governor's Island.
When that call came on the radio, they were coming.
I was uncertain of who was going to respond. About 15, 20 minutes later, there are just boats all across the horizon.
Literally 100 targets converging on the lower part of Manhattan.
When we came out of that dust cloud, tugboats, I'd never seen so many tugboats all at once.
There was just like a fleet of tugboats headed to Manhattan.
If it floated and it could get there, it got there.
All different size, shapes, and forms. And they were zooming across this water.
Ferries, private boats, party boats.
I worked on the water for 28 years. I've never seen that many boats come together at one time that fast. One radio call and it just came together just that fast.
Hundreds of boats converged on the city, leaving the sun-bathed harbor behind them. Dead ahead, the unknown.
That was something I won't forget. It was just low, dark, acrid, black smoke. It was like there was a big chimney in Manhattan. When we pulled into Pier 11, the dust was unbelievable.
And then out of nowhere, you just kept on seeing people coming.
They looked like zombies coming through the fog, and you knew that those were human beings.
Don't leave us. Please don't leave us here. Take us. At that point, the Coast Guard said, not how many people are you allowed, how many people can you fit?
Come on, guys. Anybody coming? Get your ass over here now. Now. Come on.
Boats started hanging, literally would take a bedsheet off a bunk and a can of spray paint and paint their destination on.
Some of these people never been in the water, never been on a boat before.
Housewives, workers that do windows. We had executives. And the thing that was the best, everyone helped everyone.
I want you to hold my hand, come on board. Get inside. One at a time. Get inside.
I saw 4 businessmen lifting up an old woman with a seeing eye dog, a German Shepherd, and they lifted her up like a surfboard and passed her over the handrails.
When we would carry a load of people over, and there was somebody standing there that seen their husband or wife, that made us feel even better, Well, at least we got 2 back together, Just keep on going,
The guy that works at the ferry, he's a welder. His son was on my boat. He actually came up. He thanked me.
We went back and forth all day long, carrying boatloads, as many as our boat would hold. And it was a lot of people. A lot of people.
You couldn't have planned nothing to happen that fast, that quick.
No training. This was just people doing what they had to do that day.
You forget all about what you're supposed to do, what they teach you in school, and you say, you know what? Morally, this is the right way to go, and deep down, this is what I'm gonna do.
Average people. They stepped up, and when they needed to. They showed me, when the American people need to come together and pull together, they will do it.
I do feel a way honored that I was a part of it.
That was the greatest thing I ever did with my life.
The greatest day that I've ever seen in all my boating, my life on the water.
The great boat lift of 9/11 became the largest sea evacuation in history. larger than the evacuation of Dunkirk in World War II, where 339,000 British and French soldiers were rescued over the course of 9 days. On 9/11, nearly 500,000 civilians were rescued from Manhattan by boat. It took less than 9 hours.
I believe somebody has a little hero in them. You gotta look in. And it's in there. It'll come out. It need to be.
I have one theory in life. I never want to say the word I should have. If I do it and I fail, I tried. If I do it and I succeed, better for me. And I tell my children the same thing. Never go through life saying you should have. If you want to do something, you do it.
Opportunity to take a few questions. All right. Yes, sir.
Thank you for your service. I was in the Navy and never left the United States. My dad was in the Coast Guard in World War II. His ship was the second vessel in Tokyo Harbor. Oh, wow. Where does the Coast Guard go today?
Excellent question. So the question for those that are listening at home is, where's the Coast Guard deployed today? And the answer is, quite honestly, everywhere. We're down in the Antarctic. We're up at the North Pole. We're providing the only presence, oftentimes, for the Coast Guard for the country. We have folks off the coast of Africa right now. We have a patrol, essentially fleet in Bahrain that patrols the Persian Gulf and interacts in an adversarial manner with Iran on a regular basis. We're in the South China Sea, providing a presence there. So really, quite honestly, everywhere in the world. Good question. Yes, sir. So interesting. I have responsibility for the station. So, oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking as you were saying it, but then. So the question is, how many vessels or how many cutters are in the area of Lake Michigan, and then how many under my purview? I do not have tactical or operational control over the cutters. I'm responsible for the stations and the other 11 statutory missions. However, being that said, they chop them to me occasionally for like a regatta or something of that nature. It's a little bit different than when I was in San Diego as a deputy commander, and when cutters would be deployed to San Diego for the counter-drug, counter-migrant mission, they would actually chop to us and we would control them as assets. But the reality is most of the work that the cutters in Lake Michigan are doing are ice breaking and waterways management, aids to navigation kind of stuff. And that's actually managed at the district level. In Lake Michigan, as far as home ported, the Coast Guard cutter Mackinac is actually up in Michigan, but on Lake Michigan. And then the Mobile Bay is up in Sturgeon Bay. And I think those are the only two that are actually stationed in Lake Michigan right now. But then I think we have a total of 9 for the entire district. So, yes, sir. Okay. Mm-hmm. 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 Oh, thank you. Mm-hmm. Excellent question. So the question is, how are we doing with recruiting, and then retention is obviously the other piece of that. So we are short members, and one of the things that has held us back is we've had several incidents of COVID outbreaks at Coast Guard Basic Training in Cape May, New Jersey, which has slowed the influx of new recruits. So we have a shortage of non-rates right now. There was also a slowage for a period of time at our A schools, our vocational schools, which has slowed the growth of our petty officers, our non-commissioned officers. And then even at our commissioning sources, not so much the academy, but OCS was slowed for a period of time. The problem is when you turn off the spigot, turning it back on isn't an immediate, and so there's a lag. But the answer is we are actively recruiting. I think we want to build, I think we're short about 1,500 people, and which is a large number considering we only have about 45,000. So yes, that's a great question. Thank you. Yes, Melissa.
We have a question from our virtual audience. Could you comment on how the new National Marine Reserve in Lake Michigan will have an impact on your mission?
So my background, I was talking about the fisheries that I used to do in the Gulf of Mexico. My focus was, they sent me to school to be a fisheries management specialist. So I got my master's from the University of Rhode Island. And so I'm very familiar with marine protected areas. So those are state fisheries. There are no federal fisheries in Lake Michigan. They're all managed by the states. We can assist the state in enforcing their laws, but when it comes to actually prosecuting it, we just basically what we see is we found an individual fishing in a closed area, and we call the local state Department of Natural Resources officers to come and deal with it. So we don't really have an active enforcement of those marine protected areas. Marine protected areas, based on my experience working in fisheries enforcement, are incredibly powerful and effective tools in growing the biodiversity of a particular area. So they've demonstrated their value, but it does create an enforcement dilemma, because obviously anytime you close an area, you're going to have individuals encroaching in that area because you're going to have large amounts of biodiversity. So yes, there's that enforcement piece always has to be considered, and I think you will see individuals at times probably encroaching on those rules and regulations. Any other? Yes, sir. The occurrences that we get. So that's a great question. So the question is, what's the greatest threat that we face as a Coast Guard here in Lake Michigan and specifically Milwaukee? And the answer is the same whether I'm talking about any part of the lake, and it really comes down to search and rescue. Last year, the numbers came out, and we're, I guess, either happy or sad to say we were third in the country for the number of search and rescue cases that we got, and the large explosion of boating on the water. If anyone's tried to buy a boat in the last month or last year, the prices, I think, increased by about 15 to 20%. In fact, I was out with a fisherman the other day, and he was saying that he bought his boat for $90,000. He's a charter boat fisherman last year, and he plans to sell it because he wants to buy a new boat or a better boat. He's going to sell that same boat for $115,000. So that's what he expects to get for it. So the reality is we've had this huge flood of people on the water. Not everyone that gets on the water is well equipped or well trained in how to operate a vessel, especially not realizing that the elements on Lake Michigan can change at a moment's notice and without very little warning. So I think this year we saved just over 150 lives, just our sector alone, and responded to over 1,000 cases. So I think we're incredibly useful. I think we're a value add to the community, and I think one of the things that folks can do is become more educated and enlightened when it comes to boating safety. And the auxiliary, which is our volunteer group, is very impactful and valued in doing that. So, questions? All right. Well, thank you for your time, and I enjoyed it immensely. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain Montoro. In honor of leaders like you who come to speak to our club, we'll make a donation in your name to the YWCA of Southeastern Wisconsin, whose mission is eliminating racism, empowering women, and promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. So thank you very much for speaking to our club, and thank you again from all of us for your service. Last time you will hear it from me. next week, Tuesday, October 5th, will be our inaugural Rotary breakfast meeting. So right here, 7:30, Peter Fagan from the Bucks will be our speaker. So buffet opens at 7:30, the presentation, and we'll 8 till 9 o'clock, and by 9 o'clock, everybody will be out here. So, mark your calendars. I know I was looking at some scheduling with Mary and realized I didn't even have it in my calendar as of last week. I just had the, Rotary normal lunch meeting in there as a placeholder. So again, we'll send out a reminder email, but mark your calendars for that. Rotary is proud to sponsor Hike Milwaukee. So that fundraising event for the Urban Ecology Center and the Milwaukee Rotary Centennial Arboretum runs through October 2nd, which is Saturday. There are still tickets left. Rotary had 55 of them, so if it is something that's of interest, whether it's supposed to be beautiful, please contact Aaron in the Rotary office. They've got a multitude of different hikes for hikers of every level. Please mark your calendars and sign up online for the Thai Rotarian Tour at Granite Hills. That's September 30th. For those of you on the Afghan Refugee Relief Committee, please gather in the Rotary office immediately following this meeting. And last, the next Coffee Connector will meet at Fiddlehead's Coffee in Shorewood, October 14th at 7:30 a.m. If you'd like to sign up, please reach out to the Rotary office. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you, Captain, for your presentation. With that, let's go out and do some good in this world. Meeting is adjourned.